Hey Darren, how are you doing today?
Hey, good, thanks, Reed.
Yeah, good to talk to you, and glad to have you back on too.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's nice to be out and chatting again.
Yeah, absolutely, and just I think as we'll be seeing today, the some of the stuff that I've been tracking both through our Slack channel that we're a member of, and now that's publicly available. There's been some really awesome stuff in the last few months that has trickled into and events got released with DAX Studio 3. So I'm very excited to have you back on today to talk about it. And I've intentionally kept myself a little bit in the dark on some of the exploration of it, just because there's a degree of um, surprise that's fun to be able to have as we're actually going through the demo today and everything. So
Cool.
yeah,
Well, why don't we dive straight in then and start
I
showing
think
people around?
so. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and do that. Just get right into it because I know there's a lot to cover today that we'll be able to have a chance to. So flipped over your screen at the
Yeah,
moment.
lovely, lovely. So I thought there may be some people on the stream that haven't had a chance to play with DAX Studio, and if you're wondering where to find it, daxstudio.org is the website we've got set up, and even the website had a sort of a brand new skinning with the version 3 release. Um, so the download page has a couple of little icons you can choose, and I'd recommend doing the installer, but there's also a portable version which just downloads as a zip file that you can unzip, so that's very handy if you've got a remote onto a server where you may not have rights to install stuff. As long as you
Or
can
even
run a
just like I definitely know a lot of people who have company requisitioned laptops, and you basically you need an admin to install so much as like Notepad plus plus,
Yep.
and that having that is really useful to be able to use that without requiring the administrative privileges.
Yeah, and the installer actually has an option of doing an admin install or just a current user install. Um, and I've got information in the install options about what the different is basically three. The installer has two options: all users and current users, and there's a portable version. Um, so the portable version doesn't require admin rights, so neither of
Hmm.
those two do. It's just the all users. None of them need admin rights when they're actually running. So once it's installed, it's fine. The big thing you get with all users is, or with the installer, is the Excel add-in, which actually has a problem if you've got an update of Excel from August this year or September this year. There's a slight mistake in some of the mistakes, probably too harsh a word. There's an issue in Excel that is blocking one of the internal APIs that I'm calling. So the Excel team have very graciously had a look at that. I had a call with a couple of those guys, and
That's awesome.
we think we've got a fix, and it's going through all of its reviews and bits and pieces now. So hopefully it won't be too long. So yeah, there's a few people saying that DAX Studio is not working, but I can't actually fix that from my end. I spent a fair bit of time trying every single workaround I could think of to get this fixed, but yeah, it was sort of broken on the Excel side, and they've got a fix in the works. So hopefully that will be out shortly. Um,
It's good when you can work that closely with the team, and well, especially now with you like working with and for Microsoft. I'm sure those conversations will continue to become more ingrained with each other in the um, even the partnership of the of hopefully this tool as well.
yeah, so that was a bit of a change since I was last on the
Yeah,
stream. Is that yeah, I've joined the Power BI CAT team, the customer advisory team at Microsoft.
congrats
So
on that.
I'm still based out of Melbourne, Australia. So I'm dealing with customers in this part of the world, Australia and Southeast Asia, New Zealand, um, which is a bit of fun. Um, yeah, so there's I get a little bit of contact with the team, although yeah the Excel team aren't as aware of me as maybe the Power BI community is. So um,
It still amazes
It
me
took,
anybody who deals with or is related to anything that actually involves DAX, which Excel still has heavily involvement in. Like they wouldn't be aware of you or DAX Studio specifically.
yeah, I think they were aware of DAX Studio because it's quite popular for use with Power BI, with Power
Hmm
Pivot.
hmm
Getting my powers all confused. Um, yeah, and it took us a week or two just to make the correct connections with the right guys, but yeah, that
That's
was
awesome, though.
good.
Yeah, glad to see that they finally were able to get you integrated, for sure. And but good to know that there is a patch coming out after a conversation with the Excel team to make it a little bit more compatible moving
Yep,
forward.
yep. Because they have done some updates internally to the DAX engine in Excel, which would be nice because it was falling a fair way behind. Understandably, because they've got one of the big priorities set backward compatibility
Well,
issues that
exactly. Yeah.
very careful about.
Office moves a lot slower than Power BI does, as I
Yep,
think multiple PMs at Microsoft have expressed.
yep, yep. The pace that things happen with Power BI is truly amazing.
Exactly.
So yep, some things are slow, but yep, some of the updates just are amazing. But yeah, the other reason I encourage people to do the install is you get the Power BI tools integration, which is
hmm
gives you a external tools. So we'll have a look at that in a sec. Um, but yeah, the other interesting thing under this documentation tab is I've got a few tutorials which you can getting connected and writing your initial query, and um, I've also got like pretty much all of the features. I try and put a documentation page when I add a new major um, feature in. A lot of these still got the old screenshots in. I'm still working my way through updating some of the screenshots, but um, we'll get there. So that's the website.
hmm
Main downloads on the home page. You can go to the downloads and scroll back through all the previous versions, but I do all the updates and anything else on the current release. I don't tend to go back and patch things. I sort of patch and move forward. So, but they are
It's good
there
to
if
know
you
that
need
your
an
previous are still
older
available if
version for
needed.
some reason.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly. Excellent.
So I've got a little Power BI file. This is one, I've got a little placeholder image here of New York because I've got the New York taxis data set. And when you've installed DAX Studio as an external tool, it pops up in your ribbon up here. So it's that nice little DAX Studio, and if you click that, it'll launch and connect. And I have a feeling I was just testing something before the stream on my other monitor, and it's popped across. So if I wasn't playing with two monitors, it would pop up nicely on the current screen. And you can see over on the left-hand side, it's connected to the data model. It's picked up NY Taxi 2. It's picked that up from the title bar up here in the Power BI. And I've got a little first start experience. So one of the things I think new users struggled with was a sort of the blank page scenario. You come in here, and if you didn't really know DAX, you didn't really know where to get started. So I've got a link back to the website with those tutorials, which runs through a few different examples of different DAX queries. And I've also got a link here to the query builder, which is also this button up here. So.
And exactly what you have in front of you, which I'm sure you'll get to in the explanation, and I go through this in some of my trainings, but they're outside of it does use the same underlying language, DAX and everything, as shown in that pop-up and that splash screen, which I do think helps to educate people on what they need to type to get something to render. But one of our questions on the stream already was the fact that there's a difference in how you write the expressions and have to use the evaluate. So they were wondering, like, are they going to become one? And I know plenty of reasons why I wouldn't, but I'd love to hear maybe a little description on the reason that evaluate is required as part of this.
Yeah, so when you're writing a measure, you're actually just writing an expression, and
Hmm.
measures in particular, you're writing an expression that will return a single value.
Yep.
So you're doing an aggregation, and you're telling the formula engine how to return a single value into a single cell in a result set. Whereas evaluate is a syntactical keyword that tells
Hmm.
Power BI that the client tool wants a data set returned. It wants a tabular set of results. So you can just do evaluate and then any. I'm trying to think which tables probably are. So you can just put any table expression. So it can be a table name, or it can be something like a filter or a select columns. So the evaluator said, take this expression and send the results back to the requesting tool. So if you were to actually run a trace on Power BI when you're dragging and dropping things, you'll see it generating lots of different evaluate queries.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it
And like you
returns.
said, yeah. And like you said, you can do a table, column, or measure through all of this.
Yep. Yeah, and so one thing I did do, which initially was my thoughts was sort of leaning towards getting people started familiar with the evaluate syntax, was to add a query builder, which is similar to the when you create a visual in Power BI and you drag and drop stuff on, you can drag a drop-off burrow, which is just a location, and you can grab a measure like the average distance.
I've really liked, and this is not new to just tabular. This is not new to DAX Studio 3, but it is something that when it got introduced, I think is really good for people who are a bit scared to like write custom code. And I don't know, like I can write DAX pretty well, and I still find this like, especially when I'm doing a lot of different columns and everything else, and I'm creating a grid of data to test against. It's still faster for me to use this by like a long shot compared to having to like write out the 8 different lines of code to pull that in. So it's really easy to do the draggy droppy method with this and just have it scripted out to do performance testing if you want to say test a measure against you know 10,000 rows of data or something.
Yeah, and I've found that I tend to use it a lot for that reason as well. I can drag and drop, or you can also do the search. So if I type zone, if I now down arrow, it goes into the
Oh,
like
that's
an
nice.
up and
That's
down
nice.
arrow. And then I've got a couple of hotkeys, which I think I've got in the docs in the query builder. So you can do C to push it over to columns, and then the search clears, so you can now start typing in your next. Else to stop that.
There's so many like small little gems and hidden additions and stuff into here. It's really nice. Like either for the for the person who just uses a mouse versus the hardcore coder who lives and dies by their hotkey configurations.
Yeah. Yep. So I've got C that copies into that column with measure and measures area. I've got F that will push it down to filters, and then you can pick a whole different filters, and this list will change depending on the data type. So if this is a string, the pickup burrow name, so it comes up with string options. If you were to put a numeric column like the tip amount over, you get sort of greater thans and less thans in between. And I've also got you can do B's to do both. And that push it up as a column and also add it as a filter. But all the time, this is actually building DAX. You can click on this update button and it will generate the DAX up here. And as you can then re-update, or you can turn on the auto update. So as you delete and move stuff around, or if you want to change the sort order, you can see currently says descending, and if I click it, it changes to ascending, and I can turn off the sort back on.
Even as a way to think, learn the language a little bit. It's kind of, I mean, it's the same thing with for me like Power Query. I always tell everybody to turn on the formula bar just so you can watch your changes and see what the code looks like for that. But I like this as a learning tool as well. It helps show people how certain things will be written if they ever need to do certain things, such as particular filters or anything else. It gives them some idea. Granted, they wouldn't write a measure specifically like this, but I do think it gives insight into the engine.
No, but if you just want to write your own measure, there's a little new button at the top, and that pops open, and at that point you can do your count rows of the trip table.
So I actually hadn't used that yet. Does that, so curiously, does that add that new measure? Is that just in DAX Studio temporarily while you're doing testing and development, or can that be pushed back to the model?
So DAX Studio only connects to models in a read-only mode.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
it's a temp measure.
It actually injects. Yeah, so it's a query scoped measure, so it injects this defined block.
Okay. Very cool.
So you can see the trips by the security. And the other thing I like to do sometimes, you can do the same thing with existing measures. You can see the little measure icon. There's a pencil icon even against the average fare, which is defined in my model. So I can also click the edit button on that, and I can divide it by 2 or make a change. And all that does is it adds a definition, and because it's got the same name as one in the model, it actually overrides the definition from the model just for this query.
Okay.
So that can be a really good way. And you can right click and duplicate. So sometimes if I've got the logic slightly wrong and I want to have 2 copies, I can then duplicate the measure and edit one. I think that will actually, it's actually duplicated my edited measure. Now I've switched them around, so I should, to make it clearer, I should put my changes back, and then I can edit in the copy and have half my average amount. So I can see both side by side. So that's a really quick way if you've got some, if you're trying to come up with some complicated logic, or you think there's a bug when you're looking at certain combinations of values coming from a field. If you've got some, maybe you've tried to calculate a rolling window of some sort with some sort of complicated logic, you can quickly drag and drop some fields in and then edit to see the changes, or duplicate and see the changes. So
yeah, that's great. I like it.
I even find myself doing that if it's a model someone else has built. I can drag and drop and then quickly have a peek at what they've done in the measure in a nice syntax highlighted way. So that's one change, and I suppose one of the changes with the query builder was I've changed the run button a little bit. We used to have this automatic clear on run as part of the drop downs, and the query builder used to have its own little run button, which would even confuse me sometimes, because I'd automatically go to the left hand corner to click, or if I wasn't using one of the hotkeys, and having 2 run buttons, one in the builder and one up here, was a little bit confusing. So now it's a single button, and you can choose whether, if you've got text in here and query builder open, you can choose which one you want to run. I do try and I do try and make it smart so that if you've been editing stuff in the text, it switches to that mode. If I'm in the query builder and I make changes, you'll see the little
I didn't realize it switched between those. Okay, I like that.
It switches. So as you make changes in the query builder, it says, well, that's where your focus is, so I'll switch to that mode, assuming that you've dragged and dropped something, or you've edited something in the query builder, so you want to see the results of that. Because I have had occasions where I've had a test query here that I've captured from some sort of trace or some other source, and then I've wanted to compare it to something in query builder, so I'll jump between the two. I don't know how common it is for other people, but I sort of wanted to facilitate that. You can see
Sometimes the best gems of a product aren't added because they think other people need it. They add it because the developer needed it for themselves. And then you find out later, oh, this is actually very useful for a lot of other people.
Yep, well, that's sort of actually how DAX Studio started.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think honestly, almost all external tools were that. Like you with DAX Studio, side tools with Didier is often in these chats, so maybe he's there now. That was built because he had a bunch of gaps in external tools, and I think even Tabular Editor for Daniel was built because he just needed a better tool for model management. So, yeah.
Yep, he wanted to make bulk programmatic changes to a model, and he started building it out and adding a UI, and then he made it open source, and then he put heaps of effort into getting that the DAX parsing technology he's got. I know he spent over a year on it, which is why it's sort of gone commercial, because it was a huge effort. But
well, and it's the irony with that, and like I would say with your two tools, is the IntelliSense works better in this and in Tabular Editor than it does in Power BI Desktop at the moment. It's it's had some growing pains in Power BI Desktop in the last 12 months with some bugs that have shown up in the formula bar.
Yeah, which is a bit embarrassing because my IntelliSense is really smoke and mirrors. It's not very smart at all. And it's
consistent.
I mean, the big thing is that yes, it's consistent. It doesn't know about variables, which is something I'd like to add, but that's like an order of magnitude more difficult than the one I've got at the moment. So I've got some experiments I'm playing with, but yeah, trying to figure out because you can have nested variables return, variable return.
Oh, yeah.
Figuring out the scope of which variable's active inside which statement is really hard. So
I think this was on the last time we chatted, but you can pull the measures out of the PBX file, but the actual IntelliSense engine can't, like, you can't just pull the code out and use that. It has to be rewritten yourself, I believe, right?
Yeah, there's no external hooks, and that engine's not exposed.
That's what I remember, because I think you mentioned that to me on your first stream, and then the same with Daniel. It's like it might look and act very similar to the built-in one, but it had to be built in, like, the code entirely from scratch. There's no way for us just to connect to the engine and reuse what's built into Power BI. So both yours and his, like as you said, like smoke and mirrors and a lot of work to get it to operate similarly, to provide people a familiar experience in terms of the assistant for writing the code.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. And mine's very much so I know keywords, I know bits in the model. So I can type a single column, it brings up the table names, and if I do an open bracket, it picks up the columns in that table. But I'm very much just looking at the current line. I'm not looking at the whole statement. So when you've got variables and returns and query scoped measures and things, you just have to remember those, type them by hand. But yeah, but that's a little bit of a distraction. I suppose one of the I've got a little list. If I sort of keep glancing over to the right, I've got a list on my.
No worries. I like to do a tangent every once in a while, just because I think it is good for people who are also wondering why is this slightly different. I think it gives context about some of these tools for sure.
Yeah, and the query builder and the change to the run button was definitely something I wanted to get into. So it was good to sort of. More than happy to tangent back and forwards. But I suppose one of the big things in version 3 is the new look and feel. So we're very much, I got a huge amount of help from the guys at SQL BI. A special shout out to Danielle, who's the graphic designer
The
to help
icons
put
truly
the
show. I love the
UI
new
concept
icon
together.
sets. All the subtle little like rounded edges that I think even Microsoft is starting to do a bit with their products. But it everything is just like it's softer. It's a bit just the icons and everything just makes it feel like a friendlier UI. It's just it seems more approachable in a
Yep.
lot of different ways. And I always appreciate good design that comes to that.
Yeah, well, the original, I first built DAX Studio in 2012.
Hmm.
It was originally just an Excel add-in. It was very much a Visual Basic grey forms type look. And I think about a year or two later, we came up with the version 2. That was still very much sort of in the Windows XP, Windows 7, Square sort of. So it's very much taken, sort of followed some of the Windows 11 type and the Office 365 guidelines where, yeah, everything's a little bit softer now, just around the edges on things. All of the new icon sets are, they're all vector based, so they should scale very nicely on 4K screens or 1080p. The advantage of having the vector is that I'm also now able to change the application theme. So there is a little button by default, because I've got my default apps set to light mode. This is currently on auto. It's got the little sort of half dark, half light. If I click it once, it forces it into always using light theme, and I click it a third time, the whole UI will switch to dark mode. So that was
There we go. I like it. Yeah, that's super useful, especially for coders.
yeah. I know there are plenty of people that have all of everything they can set to dark mode, and so that was quite a big ask. But yeah, it took about 6 to 9 months, because I didn't really have a theme. All the colors were sort of hard coded and everything into the app, so I pretty much had to build a light and a dark theme and skin it. So it wasn't something you could sort of do incrementally and sort of do certain windows. So I had to do the whole thing, because lots of things broke. And if you don't change the colors correctly, you end up with black text on a black background, so stuff was unreadable. But now everything, including the options window, bunch of options. Added search for this for a while ago, so you can, if you want to find timeouts, you can search for time and it finds the different timeouts, because there's a lot of options.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, that's useful. Even that's configurable at this point. And I would say even your options menu and navigation experience within the options settings for DAX Studio has had quite a bit of improvements. The search option is very useful in that regard.
Yeah, and I've always had search on the left for the metadata. I think by default I had it collapsed. There was a little icon you could click on to make it animate out. And I think I spent a couple of hours getting this nice little expand animation that worked. But it's such a handy thing if you're looking for an amount measure. You just be able to type it in and find it, and you can then either drag it into your text or into a query builder if it's open. And I've also spent time on the tooltips, so they've all had a reskin. The amounts aren't very exciting, but you can see I show some sample data. I show sort of 5 lines of sample data down the bottom.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, so that actually pulls it in and generates that related to. Okay, that's really useful.
Yeah, it runs its own little evaluate top
That's
end.
cool.
Give me 5 value in the background. It sort of gets more interesting if you've got a text measure, because you can then see the actual values. was max and min and the number of values.
Mm-hmm.
I find that really handy. For some models, like you might have a column called month, and you go, well, what format's that in? Is it the full month? Is it the 3-letter acronym? Does it include the year? Does it not include the year? So you can just quickly hover over the column, and the tooltip will pop
absolutely.
up that sort of
I love it.
information. I use that a bit myself, even if I'm sort of handwriting a measure and I want to do a filter on the value, and I'm trying to remember what format a code or a short name was in. So one of the other things that's quite probably a little bit hidden is this tiny little arrow up in the top right corner, which gives you the ribbon display options. Way up just under the close. That gives you an option to minimize the ribbon. So if you're working on a small screen, or you just don't like all of those buttons in the way, it's now just collapsed as a menu, and when you click, your options pop down.
That's useful. I like that.
So you can run it collapse. Yeah, so if you're presenting or demoing, in fact, all of these windows you can unpin, you can auto hide, so you can focus just on the code.
Mm-hmm.
And I can pin it back in place and either use them as flyouts, like that. The pane, I can fly out, click off, and it collapses back, or you can repin it back in place.
Will it ever be fully modular where you can actually have multiple windows and everything, or will it just kind of be within this frame?
So within this frame, I can take bits of the UI. So I could take the results pane and dock it over here on the right.
Oh yeah, okay.
So within there's docking within the window, and if there's a couple of other buttons up the top here. One, I can open a new query window. So this is important. If you are running portable or current user mode, you can still connect to Power BI, because I will scan your machine for any running instances of Power BI and show them in a drop down. So there'll be, if you're running 3 copies of desktop, you'll see 3 different drop downs, or you can connect to tabular servers, or you can paste an XMLA endpoint if you've got Power BI Premium, or Azure analysis services. You can paste the connection string out of that into this server. So I've got a little local analysis services. So now down the bottom here, you can see I've got 2 query tabs active. You can drag one of those out and float it on another monitor. Still, unfortunately, got the menu in one monitor, but you could have I've got my 2 windows side by side, just push them up. So I've now got my query 1 document on one side and my query 2 on the other.
I like that. You can put, having 2 open side by side, and okay. I can see some scenarios where you're wanting to do potentially model comparisons, or anything else where you're wanting to do A/B testing between 2 environments. Okay, that's really useful.
Dock my results back there.
I like that.
Still got query builder open with him. And so the other in between option, as opposed to just fully collapsing it, there's also a simplified ribbon, and this is part of an open source fluent ribbon control that I'm using. They added this functionality, so I sort of get it for free, which gives you all of the same things, just in a much simplified, more collapsed view. You can still pick all the different options for like where you want to send your results out. So by default we send results to a grid, but you can also send them just to a timer. So time pretty much the log timer just lets you run a query, and I'm not interested in seeing or capturing the results. I just want to see the, maybe you're doing performance tuning and just want to run it, capture the times, and returning 100,000 rows. So you don't want to wait for those to return. You just want to measure the actual query time. You can use that log timer option, or you can output to files, so you can CSV or tab delimited.
I mean, I've used this plenty of times to also dump a model into SQL. If I have, I've built multiple test databases by basically just bringing it into Power BI first to do my transformations, then spitting it into Azure Cloud for stuff. So the export to SQL is actually been really nice in this.
Yeah, and that was actually a feature from another CAT team member, Rui Romano, who sort of contributed that the original cut of that. And at the time, I was a little bit anti building an export tool. I'm going, no, tabular model is an endpoint. You do all of your manipulation, and then you just run queries and do your analysis against that. You don't take data out of there. But I think Power Query is such an awesome tool for data manipulation that, some people do use tabular models just as a temporary intermediate space, or like you say, I can do all my transformations and drop stuff out, and that's a great sort of starting point.
Oh, exactly. And like for me, it's, with all my trainings and other stuff, I often need like, say, 30, 40 million rows of manipulated, or, in my case, dirty data. So I'll actually use Power Query to do really quick adjustments and transformation, in a PBX file, and then use DAX Studio to dump it into Azure, which is, I mean, it's one of it's a pipeline with as few touch points, honestly, compared to try to do it in other ways. I'm better with Power Query than I am with SQL. So like, because of that, I've used this more than once to create demonstration and presentation data.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people like the Excel outputs. So I've sort of historically always had two outputs, and they used to only light up in when you're running inside the Excel add-in, because I used to talk back using the link we had in the Excel add-in. But I've got versions now that also work against all the other data sources. So the linked one actually creates a pivot table with a dynamic, sort of a live connection back to whatever data source you're looking at. And the static one will just drop the results out into an XLSX file. There was a slight bug in that. Yeah, there's a really cool library I've picked up called Large XLSX, which seemed to me maintained by a single guy, but it lets me stream results, so I don't have to pull everything into memory in DAX Studio, have that entire large data set, and then generate a large Excel file. I can write it out sort of as a stream, so I can write record 1, 2, 3, and not have to keep them in memory in DAX Studio. So I can write large result sets up to the full million rows that Excel can handle without consuming barely any memory in DAX Studio.
That's really cool. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't give you quite as good compression as like being able to compress, because compression engines, when they see repeated patterns, they can compress them better, but it still does a great job, and it's really fast and really cool. So there's a lot of little third-party libraries I've been able to pick up to make DAX Studio work.
Well, I love that it's like been very much community contributed by multiple. Well, now you and Rui are on the CAT team, obviously, but like I'm assuming when you added that, neither of you were probably Microsoft employees yet when that feature got added. So
no.
And then and as you were like saying, the icons got added in by the assistance was from the designer that is related to
Yep, SQL BI guys.
Yeah, SQL BI guys. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So Marco's a huge support. So yeah, some of the stuff in DAX Studio just wouldn't be possible. SQL BI have given me access to a code signing certificate. So sort of, in addition to being expensive, you actually need to have a corporate identity to get an extended verification certificate. So you need to have be able to show like a phone bill and proof of incorporation,
Oh, wow.
all that sort of stuff, which a little open source project like DAX Studio doesn't have. So when you run the setup for DAX Studio, it'll say that it's signed by SQL BI.
And I on the topic of open source and everything else, Greggy B had a great question on are you currently looking for any contributions or help in any way with DAX Studio?
Yeah, so I do keep the all the source codes up live on GitHub. I probably don't have. I think there's about 115 issues up there at the moment. I don't have any sort of tagged as open for that I'm specifically looking for help on. If someone's got an idea or sees something they think they can help with, I've had one request for, or at least one request for trying to convert the installer to an MSI package. So currently it's a setup.exe that you run. MSI is a lot easier for sort of corporate help desk, IT desks to roll out in their corporate deployments. So it would make people's life easier if they could just grab an MSI rather than having to repackage the setup exe. So there was someone offering to have a look at that specifically. So it's a fairly specialized sort of skill set writing installers.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. And depending on what tool or packaging tool you use as well, right?
Yeah, yep. So I'm using an open source one. Oh, it's open source. It's definitely a freeware one called Setup, which is provides it's good. It's got a whole bunch of declarative stuff, but you can drop down into some Pascal scripting for anything trickier. I've pretty much over the years, sort of the .NET platform sort of matured. I've been able to roll stuff back and simplify it, so it's largely declarative now. There's a few things where I mainly around the Excel add-in actually, where I sort of check the Excel version and try and figure out if it's 62, 64 or 32-bit Excel to figure out where to put the registry key to tell Excel where to find the add-in.
Exactly.
But the whole install is fairly light touch. There's really just that I write a couple of registry keys to tell Power BI. Well, Power BI is actually a JSON file you have to write. The Excel add-in is a couple of registry keys. And otherwise, it just copies these files into a location, which is why the installer, why I've also got the portable version, because there's nothing specific that DAX Studio itself requires to be in libraries or any external setup that needs to be made to the machine.
There's one other follow-up too, I think, on some of the open source things, because you're mentioning ideas and contributions. Greggy had a comment on whether or not there might, in the future, as far as additional features, maybe a command line type interface for scripting purposes, similar to the CLI that Tabular Editor has.
Yeah, I've got a page of about 30 ideas of stuff that I don't think people have suggested, but I've been sort of thinking through.
Okay.
And I was actually prototyping a CLI last night, so I'll probably in the next. I hate putting timeframes because I work on it in my spare time, but yeah, in one of the upcoming versions soon, I'll probably release a prototype version of or a preview version of the CLI tool. So I have experimented a fair bit with doing it similar to the way Tablet Editor does. So I know Daniel just sort of wraps a single te.exe and everything works through that.
Yep.
But there are some challenges. A command line executable and a Windows executable are very different. The way they handle processes and things differently. So I've decided to probably build like a DS CMD, or DAX Studio CMD, as a separate exe that you can run. And my plan is to leverage some of the existing code. So a lot of DAX Studio is very modular, so I could do the file output, the static output, probably hook in the export data and the export metrics. So I think things like that make sense to be able to hook in.
I really do like that they essentially the VertiPaq analyzer, which is this, got built in at a couple years ago. But it's when I do a demo on DAX Studio as part of my training. Basically, I have a module on the introduction to this. The three primary takeaways is basically like things that you need to come in and use is this, because you don't even have to write the code. You can immediately just see, if you have a row ID on a 45 million row fact table, or where are your perpetrators for cardinality and size, and then otherwise, looking at the query plan. But if you can just use this for only DAX Studio for three purposes, or two technically, it's just the query plan and timing and VertiPaq analyzer. Like you add so much value to your modeling experience for both size and speed tuning.
Yeah, you can see immediately that I've got one big table and a bunch of small ones.
99.81% of the file size. Yeah.
Yep. So it's 120.
And then inside of there, I'm guessing, is there like one column particularly, or it's a few. It's the and I'm guessing those columns are date time, aren't they? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So it's the pick up and drop off time. So. Yep. So one of the things I often say is like, if I don't really need pick up and drop offs down to the minute, I could maybe round it to 15 minutes, and then, or if really just the hour of the day is important, we could trim off a whole bunch of cardinality off these two and reduce those top two columns a lot, and maybe not really hurt the sort of analysis we could do, because whether you got picked up at 3:15 or 3:16 in the afternoon's not really important.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it's just as a bit of a tangent, as we've done a couple of times, is you almost never need a date time column. What you need is usually a date and separately a time column. And most of the time it's rounded to the nearest hour. Like most of my clients, when they want a time dimension, all right, well, do you really need to care if it was like 4:14? No. Well, like, what about just per hour? How many sales were made? That's probably low enough. Okay, so you need 24 unique values. Everything just needs to be rounded to the nearest hour, essentially, and then from there you have a timetable that has 24 rows for each hour of the day. And reconfiguring that into the other one, I'm sure you could probably, off of this model, shave, 30 to 40% of the file size, potentially?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, so...
And just as I mentioned on the VertiPaq too, I think the engine for the VertiPaq analyzer in here is essentially the same one that was also recently added into with the release of Bravo as well, right? From SQL BI.
Yeah, yep. Marco's actually built a set of packages that he deploys on a platform called Nougat, which is sort of a code sharing thing. So Tabular Editor, Bravo, DAX Studio, we all pull the VertiPaq analyzer libraries that Marco publishes up there, so they're all kind of
cool.
So
I didn't realize you get it from the same repository.
You can create a VertiPaq. Yeah, yep.
And I will say for people tuning, just as a go ahead.
So Marco originally built VertiPaq analyzer in sort of an Excel-based Power Pivot model, and then he and I sort of collaborated on building it out in .NET. and building the VPAX format, which is basically just a zip file with JSON data in it, with all of so it just has metadata. It doesn't have any user data. It just has column names, table names, and statistics. So it's relatively safe to be able to send to someone else, and you can change the extension to a .zip and have a look at all of the data in there. So it's very sort of open format. But yeah, all the three tools do the same thing. So you can export from DAX Studio and you can open it in VertiPaq Analyzer, as long as we're sort of pretty close on the same level of library.
And like, so even speaking of those three tools, it's the first time probably in a while that I would say like irrefutably, because for the longest time, I probably have like 15 external tools installed for lots of different reasons. There's not any two that I would say you should have installed 100% of the time, but like Tabular Editor and DAX Studio are the two that like are cornerstones that just, if you do modeling, you need these installed. The third recently to add to that list is the one that we're discussing, is Bravo. Like that's probably now that like the three external tool package that I will tell everybody to install at this point is, between these three, you can do a lot of stuff for any part of the modeling or design, and the calendar generator, the unused column identifier, and I think Marcos mentioned they're adding a bunch of new features to Bravo, but you guys collectively make really, really essential tools for sure for enhanced modeling and measure writing.
Yeah, yep. And Marco's and the SQL BI guys. Marco does a bit of hands-on coding, and Alberto probably doesn't do as much, but Alberto comes up with a lot of great ideas. So
yep,
they're a really good team, those two. So yeah, they along with yourself and a few other MVPs, but I think Marco and Alberto sort of got the first preview version of version 3 and gave me feedback and stuff, so that's a real big help.
They, like you said, like them as a package deal has strong but often very good opinions on a lot of stuff, and they have a good vision on the future with a lot of these things for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that's a small change is that I've made debug commas the default. So there's this spot on the ribbon here.
I'd like to think that I had a bit of help getting that put into here, because I remember there was like a Twitter or a LinkedIn thread talking about this, and there's a bit of a back and forth, and I think I even messaged you about it like a couple of years ago, but I do like the leading comma, especially because for commenting out really quickly to remove filters and stuff, it's useful. Marco's very adamant, like, you should not leave your code that way, but you have that toggle that that automatically reformats your code with those, and it's really helpful to have, I think.
Yeah, so that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Marco, actually, that was one of Marco's contributions, was that toggle, and like you said, he was very adamant that that's not how code should stay. Comments should be at the end, and so yeah, I had asked him, like yourself, could we add an option to DAXformatted.com, which is the button here that'll format your measure. So if I click that, it'll put these commas at the start of the line back on the end. It sends the query off and comes back, and
yep.
And all of my columns are now trailing at the end of lines, but it does make it hard to comment things out, because if you try and comment that out now,
you got to delete the comma. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that little debug commas is quite handy, because now I can comment out that line and it leaves the rest of the query valid, and it'll still run, except I've highlighted half of a query. I take that highlight off. So the other thing I've just realized I've been doing and haven't mentioned is if you hold down the control key over any part of DAX Studio, apart from the ribbon, and scroll the mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out. So that's really handy doing. So it works over the query builder, it works over the metadata. Even if I hover with the tooltip's now larger font.
So there's something that I have, I love that feature, because I especially with, like, I have a large monitor and everything else. I have slowly been trying to, to force myself to use like Visual Studio Code and stuff for other features, and I've realized that they don't have that feature. There is no control scroll wheel to increase text size, and it's surprising, right? But
Yeah,
every tool that I use that deals with text in any way should have a control scroll wheel zoom. Like it's such a I feel like an important feature for demos too, being able to just really quickly zoom in
yep,
without having to use Zoom It or anything else. Yep.
yeah, yeah. You can see I've got Zoom It. I've got Zoom It running as well, but Zoom It's quite good if you want to highlight a part of the screen specifically, but just to make it more readable for people if you're sharing. Even if you're doing a Teams call or something, it's handy to be able to zoom in. So not just a
Exactly.
tool for presenters.
As we're getting up on the hour, I actually have a couple good questions that are related to some of the features of this. So, Greg, thanks for the great questions so far today. Given, excuse me, potential secure privacy concerns of sending data to third party, do you have any plans to create a local only DAX formatting feature? I thought that was already built in. Maybe I'm misthinking it.
No, no. DAX Studio does use the DAX formatter.com, so we do send code off. So whatever you've got in here,
Mm-hmm.
which can be an issue if you've got
Oh,
if you've
like
got
yeah, customer or like
account or
social equals something or
yep,
yeah, yeah. Uh,
social
maybe
security
maybe I was
number
thinking of
and
tabular editor because I thought there was an issue with tabular editor of like because you can bulk format like 100 measures, and I think there is an issue with the server
yep,
being hit with like too many. So I think TE does run a localized version of the formula uh, formatter.
yep, yep, and yeah, TE3 because it's got the
Yes,
his um, DAX parsing engine can do
that's right.
that.
Okay,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it so it would be possible to build a local one. You probably don't need. I'm trying to think how deep of a parse you could get away with, but yeah, building a parsing a parser for DAX is something I've sort of been working with on the side and doing it properly and understanding the depth of how far nested you are inside an expression. Possibly do it with a not necessarily a full parse, just with a more lightweight one, but
Talking with enough people like you and I- the amount of people that I've talked to, current and prior PMs for various products at Microsoft, I have learned to stop guessing how long a feature takes. Some things were like, oh, that seems easy. Oh no, there's about 18 teams and probably a year to get that implemented, and then this seems complicated. No, no, that's just a toggle. We're actually going to turn that on next month. And this, it's a very quick and easy. It's so hard to gauge from I would say the consumer perspective. There's always
yep,
so many unknown variables that go into easy to difficult scale on certain features.
yeah. And I do have privacy toggles. There is one that's you can block all access. That's a tick mark during
Oh,
install,
okay,
so
okay.
an admin can, if you're doing corporate
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
installs. So I actually had a request from a bank saying, "Yep, we love DAX Studio, but we can't have any external connection attempts, and the users shouldn't be able to toggle it back on." So that's
So
set
with that
during
turned
install.
off, I'm assuming just the DAX formatter wouldn't work.
Yeah, it just won't work.
Okay, cool.
Yes, they
That's
can
good. That's good
block
to know.
external
Yeah,
services. I think I
I
possibly
like
even
that you can
grayed out.
restrict
Yeah,
that.
so it's so DAX format is disabled now because I've turned off external services.
Oh, and it actually okay, formats it out. Nice.
It actually disables the button. Yep.
So quite a couple comments on just people really appreciating the new icons, the style, all the little nuances that went into it. There's one other question that actually I think would be a great thought experiment for you. But if you could wave a magic wand, for my wizard avatar, and make any feature magically appear, what would you want it to be for the tool?
It's I suppose that's the thing I've probably struggled with is that it comes back to that ability to parse and have a deep understanding of the DAX. There's a bunch of things that would unlock, like having a local, potentially doing local formatting if you wanted. I know Daniel's even tabular editor does refactorings and things, so I don't know, it's hard to say. Because I've got sort of full access and built it from the ground up, I've sort of got my own magic wand, and if I want a feature, I can build it.
That's fair.
But
it's a matter of time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I would be curious, like, go ahead.
I've got like about a list of about 30 ideas in my OneNote of stuff I could build out. And
now that we have the new I'm forgetting the name of the function, but it's something that does let you kind of step through the code a little bit. It's almost like
evaluate log.
Thank you. Yes, evaluate and log. I would be curious to know how that might get integrated in the next 12 to 20, 6 to 12 months as that actually comes out and everything and starts getting released. Because I could see some really good potential, especially if you can build a UI around leveraging that a little bit. Now that the information is there.
I think that's the tricky bit, is building the UI out.
Mm-hmm.
So one option is to build like another trace, because the data comes out via a trace API. So that's easy enough. I've sort of got a prototype that can capture the raw JSON that comes out. So that's easy enough to capture the data. A lot of the challenges in DAX Studio is now is how do I fit it into the UI? How do I make the UX to a point where it's easy for someone to use? And evaluate logs, probably one of those. I could do Jeffrey Wang released a tool that just sort of shows the events and shows the data that has been captured in a little table. But potentially you could go further. Like it might be nice to be able to click on this cell and be able to see the specific portions of that data that went into calculating this specific amount. So I'm sort of trying to think, could I do something in that realm?
Exactly, because the data is available, but like you said, like the UI needs to be designed in a way that's not only discoverable, but it also it makes sense when explaining the information. So like I think that's the harder part. Like it's not just simply getting the numbers behind, a multi-part calculation with nested queries, but how to present it to the user who's using this tool.
Yep. And I did small updates recently, because I used to have with these traces, I used to have a single trace running behind the query. And so you couldn't run the all queries trace with the other two, because all queries captures traces from every user that's connected to the data source, and the query plan and server timings captures it it puts a session filter on, so it only captures this current Windows events. But now each button here effectively runs its own trace, so it's a little bit heavier on the server, but you're not blocked from having to turn things off and on and jumping back and forwards.
Exactly. I think I'll finish up with one last question from Jorge, but he actually had a good one as well. Are there any planned updates to like the IntelliSense engine, let's call it that, that's in DAX Studio?
Other than, no, I did a tiny one to make the default window wider, because I think that this code editor was sort of built for writing C# type programming, and people in BI models often have longer, more descriptive names, which is a good thing. But it was often chopping stuff off. So I've made that a little bit wider. But yeah, the big glaring hole at the moment in IntelliSense is variable support, which I really need sort of a better parser than I've currently got. really just do simple, what you call Alexa, simple tokenization of the current line at the moment. So
and like, because like as you said, the
Mm-hmm.
complexity comes through the fact that you could have incredibly nested variables, and
Yep.
you need to be able to detect the level, but then also the parent or leaf relations to those, and have everything color and format appropriately from that.
Yep.
No, that's totally
Yep.
fair.
A few other sort of trace type things like the waterfall. I've added this waterfall column to the
I like that
terrible
where it shows the like you don't have any complex one up here now, but when you have a very complex measure that has like 15 lines in here, and you can see where the bulk of the effort is coming in terms of those calculations. Maybe if you have one like that's a good example of that.
Yeah, I think that measure.
There we go.
Yeah, you
Yes,
can see it
excellent.
cascade down, and you
hmm
can sort of
hmm
get a visual if there's a big one in here or if there's lots of little ones, and you can see the timings of it. Um, yeah, specifically with it's quite helpful with direct query models too, because you can click on that and see these
Can
are
you go ahead?
scans, so they're against the VertiPaq engine. So this is not SQL, it's a language called XM SQL, but yeah, if it was direct query, you'd be able to see the query that was sent out to the source.
Can you sort by the waterfall out of curiosity? Like if you actually want like because some of these might the slices might be close enough together that it's kind of hard to see which one is the biggest. So is there a way to um, maybe sort one of those by which took the longest, or I guess duration technically?
Yeah, the length of that
Excellent.
is the,
Okay,
the
cool. So
duration.
you can do that to then sort by the waterfall.
Yeah, to sort by the
Yeah,
widest one,
cool.
and we can sort by line to get back to the sequential one.
I like it.
And we did add a little indicator line.
Oh,
Marco said he found it hard when there was a big, if you had a big query plan and you was trying to look at stuff to figure out when you were scrolling up and down, which were the child activities underneath this parent. So,
oh, that's useful. Okay, I like it. Yeah, so many great
there are a
new
few
features
little.
for this for sure.
So the
All
other big
right.
feature we added was the view as, but that's it's probably another 10 to 15 minutes in its own right. So
I'd say let's do let's use that. You know, let's do kind of a quick summary of it and use that to wrap up because I actually do think that's a pretty important one, especially for people testing as row level security. So I completely forgot about that, but I know you showed me during our test call. So like that's something at least to mention. Just 'cause it is really useful to have that.
yeah, so it's probably about the only new button in version 3 that's
hmm
brand new is view as. So it's very similar to the Power BI window. So I have
Yep.
a role defined in my Power BI called user security. Um, so if I switch over to so I've got this table here called just borough security, and that simply has the name of a borough and a UPN next to it. So I've got dynamic security on here. It picks up the username. So if I say I want to test that role with dynamic security, I do have to now tell it which name I want to test. So just made up some users. So, and it now comes up with this help bar that tells me which role and which user I'm impersonating. And actually, it probably would have made. Oh, do we have results here? Oh yeah, so you can see we've got 7 rows. So looking down on the toolbar, I can see I've got 7 different boroughs: Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island.
I also think this is really useful because one thing that I've had to do is, especially with user-based security tables, and other ones, is I've had multiple client scenarios where there has been a huge performance impact from the security implemented, depending on how the relationships and everything else are. And it's hard to test that in here, um, without having to write all the custom measures and everything, to recreate how that pipeline would normally work. So I
Mm,
think this gives a very clean way to not only test what the data is, but also what's the performance cost of, say, security table on versus off. Like, because there is extra filters being added to the evaluate and to the query plan. So it's not a
yeah,
zero cost action. So I do think this helps to test, will there be a negative impact? Because ideally it shouldn't have much, if any. But like a poorly designed security implementation, especially maybe if it's having to traverse bidirectional relationships across 5 tables, that can be very expensive as far as
it can get,
performance cost. Yeah.
yeah. We can actually see, we should be able to see it. So there's like, this is taking a bit under 390 odd milliseconds and 8 queries.
Hmm.
So this was the server timings I ran before turning this on.
Yep.
So one of the advantages of doing it this way is you can also run server timings. In version 2, you would have had to maybe create a second window and turn server timings on. It was tricky to run it, and you had to sort of manually edit the. Even then, you couldn't do it with Power BI. You could do it with analysis services, but Power BI uses a slightly different API on the back end. So. Oh, and
Faster in this case. Yeah. There you go.
But you should even be able to see. You should be able to see somewhere in here the.
Or that security. One quick curiosity, is there a way to set it? So if you're on server timings and you want to rerun it, rather than having to go click on server timings again, because it keeps anchoring it back to log. I just had a thought, is like, it would be nice if there was a way to like keep the tab that you're on pinned. So each time you rerun it, you don't have to keep going back to that tab to look at the server timings.
Yeah, it actually does that for the results output, and I had because the log on.
Okay.
So I actually fixed that while we're waiting for the live stream to start. So that'll be fixed in the next version.
Excellent. Ooh, that took quite a bit more time.
Yeah, so this is my test query. So that took 890. So that's slightly different to the other query we ran.
Okay. Oh, you froze there just right at the end of this. So let's see if you actually come back in. I'll give it, for the people tuning in, I'll give it just a second here to see if he actually pops back in, but thankfully he was at the end of the stream. You're frozen. Let's see if we can get him back online. Give me 1 sec, otherwise I might just wrap up for the day. Almost a natural segue anyways. I think the stream is still, yeah, I'm still going up. Okay. Well, in this case, what I might do with Darren, since he unfortunately seems to have frozen on the call, is wrap up for all of you tuning in today. So thanks for joining on. Like I said, of all the times to have this happen, perfectly at the end with a mostly completed demo of that rollover security. We will be on again with the stream next week as well. But otherwise, I will see you all next week. Have a great weekend. Greg, thanks for all the great questions today, and I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.